Welcome, everyone, to our annual Database Trends Virtual Roundtable, sponsored by PG Edge and StarTree. We've just released our latest trend report, Database Systems, Modernization for Data-Driven Architectures. You can download it right now today on DZone.com. Nearly every piece of software in the world needs to store some data somewhere. So it's no surprise that the global database market is now projected to reach $125 billion by 2026. Without a doubt, this is a huge and important market, and I'm excited to introduce some experts to lend us their insights during our chat today. First up, Sunny Wave, Senior Software Engineering Manager at Microsoft. We have Ananda, Principal Software Engineer over at American Water. Hey. Dennis Magda, Director of Developer Relations at Yugabyte. Hey, Dennis. And Dennis Lucier, CTO and co-founder of PG Edge. Two Dennises. We'll be flipping back and forth between y'all today. Chin Mei, Head of Product over at StarTree. And Ted, Senior Staff Software Engineer over at StubHub. Welcome, everybody. Super excited to have you all here. I'm Jesse, Chief Technologist here at DZone. And every year, we conduct our annual Database Systems Community Survey. This survey helps inform our trend reports as well as specific segments of our reports, right? The key research findings. So this year, the key findings can be broken down into two main categories. First, how developers and organizations are using databases in general. And then second, how developers and organizations are using databases for specific use cases. To reflect this split, we're going to be kind of focusing our discussion today both on general database adoption and trends, and then pivot into some of the more specific database use cases. So with that, let's go ahead and dive in. First thing, y'all have seen the trend report. The biggest thing in the trend report, Postgres. Postgres is number one for all databases in 2024, according to our survey, and probably many others, with 61% of all the respondents saying, you know, they've used it. So why do you think that is? What are the things about Postgres that makes it so popular? And Dennis, Lucia, well, let's start with you.
I would have to say that, you know, Postgres, the community for the last 30 years has this philosophy of like, use Postgres if you love your data. And it's very good about transactional. So it does what it does, and it does it really well. The community is relatively conservative. And there's a whole bunch of people, like I've been in the community for 20 years. Others have been in the community for like 35 or some crazy number like that. So relational database is here to stay, and Postgres is here to stay, I will say.
All right. Anybody else who has some reason they love? Okay, Dennis Magda, why do you love Postgres? What's great about it?
So I work with Postgres daily, and same as Dennis. We both represent the PostgreSQL community. We work for different companies, but our goal is primarily to increase the usage of our beloved database, and that's what we do on a daily basis. I usually define three reasons why Postgres is getting traction this day. The first one, as Dennis said, it's the community. It's a fully open source project. It's being developed by the Postgres global development group. So there is no any single vendor that controls the life of Postgres. If you take a look at other databases, we're going to discuss MySQL today. I don't have anything against of MySQL. I know the guys who developed the database, but still, MySQL is governed by Oracle, whether we like it or not. And we don't have the same situation with Postgres. It's fully open, and it's being developed by the community. The second reason is I hear this more often from those who use Postgres for various application workloads. Postgres is sort of it's an enterprise-ready database. You have the core database engine, and then we have a big ecosystem of solutions that help you to make Postgres scalable, highly available. We have different load balancers, etc., etc. If you want to go like we at Yugabyte, we develop a distributed version of Postgres. Dennis at PG Edge does the same. I think that our companies compete for some of the use cases, but nevertheless, that makes Postgres stronger, right? And it makes it more enterprise ready.
Yes, we're always better. No, I'm just kidding.
Sometimes it's like depends. And finally, it's ecosystem. If you take a look, if you pay attention to Postgres, the core development of Postgres is rather conservative. when you change the core database engine, usually there are some minor changes, but most of the innovation that takes place in the Postgres ecosystem happens through the ecosystem of extensions and other derived solutions. So those three reasons I usually think contribute the most to the popularity of Postgres: open source, community-driven, enterprise readiness, and the rich ecosystem of extensions and derived solutions.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna have to keep my eye on you two, competitors and all that stuff. How about you other guys? Anybody have any other
We're going to
things?
be very, I'm going to throw out little barbs, but I'm going to be more subtle than Mr. Magda is.
Okay, good. Anybody else? Ananda, Chinmay, Ted?
Yeah, I can.
Oh, Sunny,
go
yeah.
next. Go ahead, Sunny.
Yeah, can you? Okay. Yeah, so I strongly agree with Dennis, like the three things that he mentioned, right? So the strong community support is there. A lot of people actively answer questions in the community. And also big companies like the Reddit, Instagram, or GitLab. So all these big companies currently use Postgres for handling the big queries. As well as the indexing, and there is a lot of performance optimization capabilities are available in Postgres. I currently don't use Postgres as work. I work for SQL Server, but I can hear this
you're
a
Microsoft.
lot. Yeah, but I do hear a lot from the community whenever there is this conferences happens related to Postgres.
Mhm.
Yeah, it used to be. I mean, it's interesting. And Chinmay, you go after this. It used to be, just a handful of huge databases: Oracle, DB2, SQL Server, maybe a Sybase in there. But Postgres, I remember when Postgres started to really gain traction, and from an old database hat, it's a little shocking. But Chinmay, what were you thinking here? What do you think is so great about Postgres?
Sorry, I made the classic mute burp. I will +1 on all of that, but maybe offer a different perspective. So I don't come from the traditional OLTP land, although I did work on a key value store back in the days. But currently I'm part of the Apache Pinot, which is a real-time OLAP community. It's nothing to do with Postgres, but a lot of the users in the community have asked for Postgres support for Pinot in terms of the wire protocol or being able to have Postgres SQL compliance for the database. I think that speaks to how much people love this. They want what they love in Postgres, and even in real-time OLAP. And again, the reasons are somewhat similar to that's developer friendly. It's easy to extend, so you can connect BI tools, any BI tool, to something new like Apache Pinot through the Postgres wire protocol. So I think it's become a standard for developers and all the things they do.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's great. And the wire protocol front, we all know what MySQL, I believe it uses TDS. So you Microsoft guys will like it. But as we're getting into that next, and Ted and Ananda we'll get you on this one. Second from Postgres is MySQL. And I'm trying to prevent any type of wars, right? OLAP versus OLTP, MySQL versus Postgres. There's 10, and y'all are grinning because you know what I'm talking about. Database people can be passionate.
Come on.
But MySQL is number 2. So MySQL came in number 2 for our survey at 56%, who are actively using it like in recent months, right? So when you're looking at our data, right, a lot of these databases had some positive correlation between organization size and the database use, like Mongo and Amazon Redshift. MySQL, on the other hand, had no real significant usage difference based on the size of the organization. So do you think that's surprising given the nature of these platforms as well as the different company size characteristics? Like, what would make MySQL unique in this way? And Ananda, why don't you kick us off, and then we'll hear from Ted too.
Yeah, sure. So I have extensively worked in Oracle and a little bit in MySQL. What I found in MySQL is we had like a 5 GB database. So we primarily used MySQL for one-time or few time inserts and multiple time reads. So I used MySQL to insert data from Bloomberg trade-related data inserted once in the morning, and then that will be queried multiple times throughout the day by the user. So there was a niche use case which I used MySQL for. Otherwise, there are some issues with the MySQL as well, like we can't create materialized views and a few other things. So In my experience, it might be used for specific use cases rather than can be widely used across the enterprise.
Okay. All right. Ted, agree, disagree, got other points of view?
I might not be the best person to answer this question because I have no experience using MySQL. My big closest experience in this topic is just through the broad kind of availability of Postgres wire protocol that people have mentioned. Things like Redshift adopting that protocol, things like Apache Calcite providing the wire protocol to
CockroachDB.
for CockroachDB. Most of the companies that I've worked for, Netflix and Stripe, we didn't have transactional databases as our kind of operational kind of data stores. We used Cassandra, we used MongoDB.
Yep.
So my experience in that area is a little bit light. So, but definitely I've worked a lot with Postgres protocol, so that standard has become pretty broad across the industry, even if I don't have direct experience with Postgres.
Yep. Dennis Lessier, what do you think?
Yeah, so this is really a fascinating question, because when I first joined the Postgres community, and before I founded Enterprise DB in like 2004, right? I first kind of joined the community about 2003, 2002. But MySQL had a version that just worked, and it worked on Windows, and everybody needed to run it on Windows back in the day.
Yep.
So the
Yep, I
reason
remember.
MySQL was more popular than Postgres in the early days is because it was easier. It was pretty damn good, right? It's better. It's a better relational database than Microsoft Access. It's pretty damn good.
Calm down, Sonny. No,
right? But over time, so in 2004, 2005, that's why Bruce Mumji, the leader of the Postgres community, really worked on, it's like, let's make sure that Postgres just works on Windows, right? Even if it's not our favorite environment, because we're all open source nerds, let's make sure it just works on Windows, right? So the community did that. And then over time, Postgres has focused, and I think others have mentioned this, it focuses on, there's a core of what Postgres does, and that is it needs to be a strong relational database, whether you're doing OLTP or other use cases. And then it's got an extension model where you can build extensions on top of it and help it to specialize for certain use cases. So Postgres is modular, it's conservative, it's a general purpose database, and it's easy to use. And one more thing is my friend Simon Riggs, who's recently deceased, but he did a presentation on this. He said at the European Postgres conference, I think last year. But he said all databases in the future will be based on Postgres. So it's a rock solid foundation for doing things, and you may use pieces of it and do extensions to it, or you may take pieces of it that you like and make a non-relational database over it, right? Postgres started as a non-relational database. It's still a very good object database. It's a JSON database. It's whatever you, right? So Postgres is just—
There's a lot of flexibility in it for sure.
Yeah.
I agree. What about anybody else? Anybody else? MySQL fans out there? Dennis Magda? Okay, go. And then Chinmay, he's got his hand up. Yeah, y'all go next.
Yeah, it's even though I recognize myself as a Postgres guy, I was forced to use Postgres. I was a fresh grad who joined a company building a high-load Java application, and the IT administrators, DBAs, decided to use Postgres because, like, those days it was 12 or 15 years ago. Postgres, you had Postgres 8 or 9. I don't remember. I can't remember the version. And MySQL was the king. And I used to use MySQL before. Why? Because the MySQL is also an excellent story of the value of integration with a broader ecosystem. I was building some websites. In those days, PHP was the main language for creating those websites, and PHP was very well integrated with MySQL. As Dennis said, that usually you install Windows, you have MySQL easily integrated, and the same was true for me as a PHP developer. Even though I worked as PHP developer for half a year, I was using MySQL. I was happy. It just worked. And today we can see that Postgres, for instance, is being used by default within the Ruby community. But I think that MySQL is still being used by default within the, like, Django, if you build Python applications. So the value of this database adoption is also like what community runs on the database, and developers play a very vital role in the popularity of those databases. If you take a look at, like, you guys did this report, right? But also once you publish that report, almost the same day, Stack Overflow publish their developer survey. Developers also vote for those databases. Developers select those databases, and it's important to integrate MySQL. That was really important to integrate MySQL in some of the most popular frameworks of those days, and that's why MySQL is still very strong. Even though Postgres is getting traction, MySQL is still very well widespread and used by some developer communities.
Yeah, it's a 5%, so it's pretty good. Now, Chinmay, can you answer the question without saying the word Postgres?
Yeah, I feel I should speak. There's too many Postgres people in the room. Maybe I should speak on behalf of the other party. But in my last two companies, Uber and LinkedIn, they were very heavy MySQL shop. Now, it's maybe a large company thing, but as a startup, we're actually using MariaDB, which is kind of a
Maria, yeah.
You could call it MySQL, the MySQL of the past. But I do see that very often, especially with Uber and LinkedIn. They did build a sharded MySQL database and then open source that. Again, very developer friendly. It started off by some developer who really invested in that and grew from one node to a whole distributed system on this. So we do see. I don't know if there's a clear winner, but
I'm not asking for a winner. That could be dangerous.
The key there is that there's two winners, right? It's Postgres and MySQL.
They're both super popular.
From back in the day when I spent a couple of years being the Postgres product manager at AWS, the key, if you look at the top 10 customers for AWS, I won't go over the names, but the top 10 for Postgres and the top 10 users of MySQL, it's like 7 of them overlap, right?
They're the same, yeah.
The people that use AWS the most. So
there
isn't, for new development, a lot of people choose Postgres. For existing projects that started in MySQL, a lot of times it's not worth switching because they're both and they're both good at different things. I'm a Postgres bigot, so of course I think Postgres is better, but MySQL is not a terrible product.
All right, well, we're going to talk non-relational now. So GraphQL, let's get into it. So non-standard, or I would say non-SQL standard query languages, the number one, of course, is GraphQL, 40%, which is well above XPath and XQuery. If y'all remember XQuery, 27, 22%. So there was a strong correlation between company size and GraphQL. Like the largest organizations use GraphQL more, right? Larger applications may require interaction with more APIs. And it's fascinating when you look at some of these non-ANSI SQL-ish type languages. You've got Nickel, you've got Sparkle, you've got, y'all are familiar with all of them. But like, how many of you have used GraphQL or are using it right now? Just show of hands real quick, familiar with it. Okay, we've got some GraphQL users. So given the popularity,
but would never call myself a user.
Okay. Given the popularity of GraphQL, right, and how it interacts with APIs, how do you think this has reshaped our perspective due to its popularity of non-SQL query languages? I'm not going to say NoSQL. That'll not come out of my mouth. Their capabilities and our own experiences with GraphQL, like what are its greatest benefits and any limitations that you know of? And Sonny, you had your hand up. So what do you think of GraphQL?
Yeah, I was like one of the early adopters of GraphQL. Like I didn't use it in the product code, but in the previous project that I worked in Microsoft, I exclusively used GraphQL. And this was around the time 2016. That's when 2015, I think, Facebook kind of open sourced GraphQL. So we were dealing with a lot of performance issues. We had like a huge database and a lot of, the standard, typical, traditional query optimization plans. We have to go through like what exactly is happening, how can we improve the performance, and then we got to know about GraphQL. So that kind of significantly reduced our development time, as well as like, we don't have to deal with, I was not considered as DBA at that time. I was not at all, fully knowledge in the database field. I was completely on the back end. Developing the APIs, and that's when my introduction happened to the GraphQL. And one of the main advantage with the GraphQL is like, you can query and get data from different tables. Like you don't have to, like in the traditional SQL, you write one query targeting one table, or then you have nested queries to talk to 2 or 3 tables, and then you get the output, right? So with GraphQL, you can avoid that completely. And people coming from non-SQL background, they'll just love it. So that's how I got exposed to GraphQL.
Cool. All right, anyone else? Ted, Dennis?
I'll say a couple things. I'm not a lover of GraphQL, but there's tremendously powerful things that you can do with it, right? So one of the things that happens is if you write some people will write a SQL query that goes on for 10 pages. And they'll overly nest it, and it's like nobody else but the author can understand. But with so I'm a big fan of SQL for its generic applicability. And I like, that in a stored procedure, it's like, do one simple query that everybody understands, maybe join a couple tables, do some procedural logic, and then do something with a temporary table or whatever you need to do. But when people try to write something complicated in one query, nobody can understand it afterwards. And GraphQL and it's hard to debug too. If you can understand it and it doesn't do exactly what you want with the optimizer, it's like, good luck debugging that. It'll do something different on every database. So GraphQL is cool, but it confuses me when I try to use it because I'm an old SQL guy.
Yeah, I get it. All right, Ted, you were going to say something. Jump in there, man.
Yeah, so we leveraged GraphQL quite a bit at Netflix because we had this kind of disparate set of systems in our studios that all were running on different databases, and presenting a unified API for accessing that data was kind of a difficult problem to solve. And that's where GraphQL kind of allowed us to stitch together all those different systems, pull that ETL out, and then stream that into the data warehouse, which is where my kind of area of responsibility began. And that proved to be a pretty powerful abstraction for us, not to understand the specifics of some of the underlying systems and be able to just make a single call that could hit all those different systems, stitch that data together, and pull it out.
Very cool. Yeah, I remember a Netflix presentation years ago on the polyglot database kind of idea and how all that stuff worked together. So that's pretty awesome. Anybody else experience with GraphQL, like benefits, limitations? Any advice for people getting started with GraphQL, especially Sonny, Ted?
Yeah, I mean, so basically the understanding part, like some of the advice that over the period of time I have used GraphQL, right? So you need to understand about your schema, how to optimize performance, and some of the best practices. Like when I started first, it was like the community was also not like we used to have documentation, but the community help was not there. But things have changed a lot in the last 1 decade. Right, so now you get the good community support is there. So a lot of documents are available. I've read a couple of white papers also how to go through when you set up your new GraphQL endpoints. So I think that way the things are completely changed from the last 10 years. So whoever's starting new, and if they have like large enterprise e-commerce application, I would highly recommend them to explore the possibility of GraphQL before going to the traditional writing SQL queries.
Awesome. Very cool. All right,
Yeah.
Dennis, real quick, and then we're going to get on to security.
Real quick. This is a question for Santosh. Do people use GraphQL? I know that GraphQL has become quite popular. It's very powerful stuff you can do with it. It's popular. Are there use cases where you want to use that if you're just going to a Postgres database, or is it mostly the polyglot thing for tying together databases, 8 different APIs and things like that? But how do you see it evolve to being used today?
Yeah, so basically, like if you're coming from the the microservice background, right? Like not the traditional monolithic, but people coming from the microservice background, so where independently teams work on one single component, like one single microservice. So there, effectively, I've seen people using the GraphQL compared to the Postgres. So that was my observation. Like in Microsoft, I didn't get a chance to use it at all. We are like completely Microsoft tool shop here, so we are not allowed to use the open source without getting some legal permissions. So that's why, like, my experience was mainly on the open source. Like I used to participate in a lot of this open source GitHub repositories. There, I've seen people using GraphQL.
Yeah, and I've seen it used for both, Dennis. We have a small app that we're using it against just one database. It's more about how you want to access the data if you don't want to use a traditional, wire protocol and all that stuff. But we're going to jump real quick, and I want to talk a little bit about data residency. So cloud, non-cloud, and security and all that stuff. So what's interesting, if you look at our report, about 76% of respondents said that they're either using hybrid or fully cloud-based approaches to storing their data. And another 73%, again, a majority, said that they had to personally consider data residency in software they contribute to at least somewhat regularly, right? Sometimes, often, or all the time. So we're going to be exploring in future research the primary reasons developers have to consider residency in greater detail, right? So when you think about cloud versus non-cloud, right? And I've met people that our database will never live in the cloud. We're always going to have it on premise. And I've met people, y'all are nuts. I trust AWS or, whatever cloud-based solution you want to choose. But like, where do you have your data? So quick show of hands, who has data in the cloud? All right, everybody has data in the cloud. So tell me a little bit about how you thought through that, right? And how do you personally consider whether you're going to move that data to the cloud or not? And Ananda, let's start with you.
Sure. I believe there's a strong correlation between the domain which we are in, as well as the selection of the cloud. I've worked across domains like banking, trading, real estate, and utilities. Banking and trading, I've found that like they are very reluctant to go into cloud or even
Yep, I
hybrid
can see
cloud.
that.
They're taking a very slow approach even in moving to a hybrid cloud. But then when I worked in a real estate domain, we used Snowflake. Data was there.
yeah.
So that was pretty cool. And in my current company, we are moving from on-prem to cloud. We are using AWS, and almost 90% of the stuff has moved to cloud. So I believe it also depends upon the domain which we are in.
Okay, Chinmay, yeah.
Yeah, I think there's two dimensions here, right? One, which is cloud versus non-cloud. And even if you are in the cloud, SaaS versus what we call as BYOC. So I'll give an example from the Startree perspective. So we have customers or users in all three types. So the non-cloud users, they directly use our binaries because they're extremely security sensitive, or cloud non-believers, if you may. So and these are typically the sorry to say, but the very companies that have been around for a while.
Don't call me old. Don't you call me old, Chinmay.
So I get it. Changing policies is difficult in these organizations. So there are, for those, they directly use the binaries and do a self-managed one. But there are lots of companies who are in the cloud, but they don't want to send the data outside of their security, the governance boundary. So in Startree, we actually invested in both these things. So we obviously started with a SaaS solution where customers are sending us their data and queries. But very early on, we invested in BYOC, or Bring Your Own Cloud solution, where we can deploy our software in the customer's account and then still provide a fully managed experience. With that, a lot of we work with a lot of users, like Stripe is one user who's using this kind of a model. And BYOC seems to be a middle ground for the security conscious, but companies that are still are running in the cloud.
Yeah, you're still going to have to sell it. I mean, just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get me. All right, people, just let's level set with that. The other thing is, you bring up a good point, right? 92% of the people that filled out our survey said that one of their biggest concerns was everything that was on the OWASP data security top 10, right? These threats, data breaches, insecure data handling, broken authentication, access control, injection attacks are some of the biggest concerns. And we were talking on an AI trend report not too long ago, and AI is being used a lot for hacking, cracking, and getting into security breaches and stuff. I see your eyebrows, Dennis. It's freaking me out, man. But it's a great point, right? Like, based on these findings, it seems there are actual credible threats. And that's one of the reasons people are trying to decide, am I going to keep my data in my big old Oracle database, in my very nice IT closet and all that kind of stuff? Where are they going to move it? So when you're thinking about this and you're thinking about how you feel, like, what are some strategies that you have put in your organization as you're considering your data residency to make sure that your organization's future-proof and secure? And Dennis, why don't you jump in there?
Yeah, so I think it comes down to the world. It's what your definition of hybrid is, because everybody defines it a little different. But there are like those old industries. It's like, well, there's old people that don't really want to change, right? And there is some truth to that. But they're highly regulated industries that the regulations on them, they tell them, some of those regulations tell them they must use the cloud, and other regulations tell them they can't use the cloud, right? So it's like, it's not surprising that they sometimes use the cloud in some situations. Some banks almost exclusively use the cloud. Other banks insist that regulations prevent them from using the cloud. So both are true, right? So these paranoia things. And I am, so as I said, so hybrid is the way to go. And this, we call something slightly different, but bring your own cloud, bring your own account, right? This gives customers that sort of that in the middle thing to do with software products. And then the last thing I wanted to say is, maybe later we can talk about some of Jesse's paranoia problems and things that he wants to.
We're not going to talk about my paranoia
We'll do
problems.
that at the end of this call, because I think that'll be fun.
We might. Well, the next thing is going to be AI, large language models, all that stuff. I want to get into that before we leave. So, a couple of topics as we're starting to wrap up here. It's a huge thing, right? If you look at the future of database systems, right? Y'all have been around for a long time, working with databases for a long time, of all different shapes, sizes, SQL, not only SQL, right? All these different things, but a lot of things have changed, right? Streaming media, large language models, vector databases, these graph database, robust APIs, everything's out there. So, as we start to wrap up, I want to ask a question. How do you see databases and the solutions around them evolving over the next couple of years as we plan for all of these other technologies that haven't yet hit us, right? I'm thinking about the whole NoSQL movement, where we tried to get people to not use SQL, but it turned into something else where we still use SQL, but we added something in, right? So these are huge fundamental shifts. And what do you see as the advantages, obstacles, things that are getting our way for AI, these models and database systems in general? And okay, Dennis, Magda, why don't you start us off, man?
Yeah, you have to put AI aside. I think that because we can speak about AI for the next good 1 hour. I want to make a connection to the previous question related to the data residency. I think that what's happening right now, I gave a lot of the talks on how to build and design multi-region applications, and those multi-region applications can span multiple public cloud regions, or let's say your private data centers. And after every presentation, I have someone stopping by and asking, all right, we need to deal with these data residency requirements. And that's why they want to design that multi-region approach. But the data residency, how is it related? The databases need to figure out how to store data automatically in specific cloud locations or specific private data centers. And they do this for the first reason that we already discussed. You need to comply with data regulatory requirements. Think about Europe that has GDPR, right? If you want to do some serious business in Europe, you have to make sure that your SaaS product or your service keeps the data of the European citizens there. But apart from that obvious reason, you do this data residency if you want to achieve low latency across different locations. Because let's say that you created some SaaS product and your primary user base right now is in the United States. And your primary database instance is in the United States. And if you have your customers in Australia, then the latency for them will be extremely high, because the traffic for those customers have to travel across the oceans, across the land, until it gets to the United States. That's why the databases also, I think that's one of the things that many databases need to solve. Like, you want to support these data residency requirements, and how to make sure that is automated within your database engine. Because you want to run your database in a scalable configuration. And if you do that, then make sure that the data sits in specific locations, because sometimes you need to comply with regulations. Sometimes you want to provide low latency for your global user base. So this is my take
issue.
on the...
It's something big.
Yeah,
I get it. All right. So, all right. We're switching to AI. and large
My
language
answer will
models.
have to do with AI. I guarantee it.
All
Well,
right.
I can't guarantee it.
You got to guarantee it. And so the other thing I want to do as we're wrapping up, edge computing is a huge issue too, right? So that's another one of those things that you got to think about. So we've got all of this stuff that's coming our way. How are we going to respond to it? And Dennis, go ahead and get in there, and then Ananda, you can go next.
So edge computing and multi-region stuff are related in the relational space.
They are.
And so, and I'm going to blend in AI with my answer without going on for more than 1 minute. So for multi-region, as Dennis Magnus said, it's like, you do it for reasons of low latency. You do it for reasons of high availability. You do it for reasons of data residency. You do it for cloud versus hybrid. You do it for different reasons. And the great thing about that architecture, people typically, there's about 4 reasons there. People typically care deeply about 1 or 2, and the other 2 come along for the ride because of the architecture. On the AI stuff and how that affects relational databases, it's like people are doing this cool stuff like with the small language models and other different things, whatever they call it in AI, right? But they're doing cool stuff where it's like you can use these concepts in AI to answer, against your proprietary data in a secure way. And the way you can integrate that with Postgres, with various open source and tools from Microsoft, tools from Google, tools from AWS, et cetera, there's just really cool stuff you can do with AI. As well as you could scan your logs and try to figure out how to tune your database auto-magically. But anyhow.
That's cool. All right, Ananda, what do you think?
So yeah, AI is disrupting every industry and all the tasks how we are doing currently. So a database development and database maintenance will also get disrupted by AI in the next few years. How we generate queries and how we generate schema, how we are coming up with a data architecture. And with the help of RAG and the contextual grounding, one will be able to compare between the current architecture and how it should be for a particular requirement. Right? And vector databases is also really helpful in coming up with the embeddings, especially multimodal embeddings, be it a video, be it audio, be it a diagrams, everything can be embedded, and a user can query against it and get the desired result.
That's awesome. All right, everybody. Chinmay, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so maybe
and then Sunny, by the way.
I'll respond to the AI question. If we have time, maybe also edge computing. But on AI is definitely fascinating. Right? There's aspects of evolving the user interface with AI, right? So instead of writing queries, people now want to interact with the database, which is cool. That's something we are trying as well. The other thing we were trying is tuning. Why is my query slow? That sort of a thing is actually phenomenal. We've had some amazing success early on already in our. We have a query console. You run your query, it'll tell you it is slow because you're missing an index or you need a derived column, something like that. And the other thing I wanted to say is, for vector databases, I feel there will be a point where like Postgres or even Pinot for that matter. I think though the standard databases will probably win. You will not see these specialized databases that the hundreds of them that are coming up. Most of them can actually, you don't need most of them. Like Postgres PG vector is good enough. I feel that's going to be I strongly believe there'll be standardization on a handful of vector DBs in the future and not specialized ones.
Right.
Awesome.
Those specialized extensions that fit inside of Postgres, sometimes one of them will win, sometimes 3 of them will win. But this is part of the beauty of Postgres is that extension model where you can do stuff that operates in the core of Postgres as an extension to do things like PG vector and XML specialization, object databases, et cetera. There's a lot of specialization that goes in there, yet you're still using the core Postgres that we're all, I think, bigots for here.
Most of us. Yeah. Sunny, what do you think? Future of databases, man. Lay it on us. And then Ted will end up with you.
Yeah. So the future is really looking bright for databases in terms of like the adoption, as well as, the adding new capabilities of AI ML into each and every database. Like when ChatGPT came out, right? So ChatGPT was actually powered by Cosmos DB. So Cosmos DB was using as main database. And then they introduced something called Cosmos DB for MongoDB vCore, where they introduced the vector embedding. So now you can just store the vector embeddings within the same table in a different column. So that kind of explored more options now. Like people are doing all sorts of RAG applications. They are making use of it. So recently we conducted a Microsoft Cosmos DB hackathon. So I was participating as judge there. Oh my God. So we got like close to some 10,000 folks participated and 200 plus submissions. And the kind of these hackathons, right? So everybody came up with the different ideas using a lot of built-in features. So Azure, the Microsoft, when they added the support, like they had the close collaboration with OpenAI and they introduced the Microsoft Azure OpenAI. So that kind of unleashed a lot of potential with AI. So whoever now wants to get hands-on with AI, everything is right and built there for you if you go with the Microsoft technology. Like I'm not talking only specific to Microsoft technologies. Even AWS, Google, everybody's coming out with
No, we're gonna have to cut you off.
stuff.
Now you're selling.
But yeah, no, not at all. But overall, I see there is a huge potential. A lot of databases, they are introducing new AI ML capabilities, and I think in the next couple of years it will completely change the scenario.
Awesome. Ted wraps up, man.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everyone that they've said so far, that they're just kind of scratching the surface of what's capable with these large language models and different AI technologies. But one of the things that I've seen a lot is kind of to Chinmay's point that like the vast majority of folks, they don't need a specialized piece of hardware or software to service their use cases. They can kind of use what's available in the more mainline things. And actually introducing a specialized database might not be the right move, because then you're introducing an entirely different interface, different design paradigm, and it just creates like a much more complicated architecture. Whereas, and you do get to a company that has a need for that specific use case, like a Stripe, who's had tremendous results with StarTree in terms of providing like low latency access to really large data. That's like kind of like an area where I feel like some of these AI technologies could really help stitch together those different technologies so that it's easier to interface, easier to develop against a different set of databases rather than having just one single one. Right now, it's very difficult to create those abstractions that span those different technologies. And that's where I've seen it most in my world, where the companies I've been at, we've had to like introduce many different technologies, and it's difficult for developers to really reason about which one to use. That can kind of be abstracted away a little bit when you have some higher level tooling for developing against those systems.
That's awesome. Well, listen, y'all, thank you so much for being here and such a great conversation. We are out of time. A big thank you to all of you tuning in for today for our chat. We hope you were able to glean a lot of insights into the world of modern databases. And hopefully you also took a few things away that can improve your own deployments. A special thanks to PG Edge and StarTree for supporting this engaging discussion. Your support has been pivotal in making this event happen today. If you enjoyed our discussion and you want to see more like it, head on over to dzone.com/events to see all of our on-demand content. Stay with us for just a minute and you can tell us how we did and give us some feedback on how we can improve. We love to hear from you. Until next time, keep innovating.